And hello and welcome to this CNBC Africa special broadcast with myself, Tanya Habimana. We're here with Siemens to discuss a topic that affects all of us. Greater infrastructure challenges, well, not just challenges, but actually solutions affecting Greater Johannesburg. We experience it every day, and pressures are mounting, coming from aging infrastructure, rapid climate change, and a population that is growing at a rapid rate. Here at this panel, we're going to be discussing the solutions that are going to change our everyday lives. I'm joined by an esteemed panel, which I will introduce to you now. To my left is Sir Sipho Mosai, the Chief Executive at Rand Water. Then we have Sabina Dalamo, Chief Executive Officer at Siemens. Aradna Pananduram, Acting Research Group Leader, Energy Industry Team, Energy Center at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, and Peter Varndell, Chief Executive Officer at the NEPAD Business Foundation, Southern and Eastern Africa. So without further ado, let's start this conversation. Now, Aradna, I'd like to start with you. You have a background, actually, at Eskom. You are an engineer by profession, and you have been doing extensive research in terms of the energy supply, the grid integration, as well as the energy challenges that we are currently facing. What have been your main findings when it comes to the landscape in terms of energy for Johannesburg?
So I think it goes back to the broad energy landscape in South Africa. And looking at South Africa, I think we are all aware that we have an energy crisis in the country with aging infrastructure from a generation point of view, filtering down into distribution and transmission as well. So I think the problems at the national level have very much filtered down to this local level, and we're facing the same issues with, as I've mentioned, the aging infrastructure, poor performance, and lack of maintenance on the infrastructure. But I think the opportunity for the energy transition and what that brings for the country, I think, is very much apparent. And as the country, I think we need to kind of leverage on that opportunity and use that to move forward with sustainable solutions, as well as trying to fix the problems that have been developed as part of this long aging infrastructure problem that we've had in the country.
Thank you. Now, I'd like to turn my attention to you, Sipho, because on the one hand, we have energy. We've all experienced it. But we also have water, which has made quite a few headlines in the recent weeks. How would you describe the current landscape? I mean, we've heard the terms water shedding, water allocation, and you and I had a discussion about this earlier. But from your words, how would you paint the current landscape?
Yeah, I think within particularly Johannesburg context, let alone South African context, we probably should call water adaptation. And I think we're going through that, excuse the pun, watershed moment, where we need to relook at our interface and our interaction as a people with water. I think water is a scarce resource in many respects. The earth does not get any new water from the outer space every year. The earth recycles water. And that pattern is unpredictable. I mean, we have one of the highest evaporation rate, but one of the lowest rainfall. And with climate change, it really requires of us to adapt and look at how we interface with the water. Up here in Joburg, we one of the highest water consumers of water in the world. Currently, we're sitting at about 300 liters per capita per day. On average, the world is sitting at 173. So we have been asking ourselves questions, and we want to take our consumers through that journey of clearly understanding that this is a finite resource. We have climate change. We really have to look at the way we use water. Where do we use it? What do we do with drinking water? Do we have to use drinking water for non-drinking purposes? The world is looking and asking themselves those questions. So ours really is to take our consumers and our municipalities, by and large, through that challenge.
Now, in terms of when we look at energy and the current situation that we find ourselves in, as well as water, we've very often looked to government and to government organizations in order to solve for this problem. Now, Siemens has been actively working on initiatives representing the private sector in a way in terms of trying to find solutions. Sabina, perhaps you could give us more insights into some of the initiatives that Siemens is running.
Yeah, so maybe we come very much home to where we are today at Siemens Park, right? So at Siemens Park, we do have piloted our technology we use within the regards of energy generation. As you see, we have here just short of 1 megawatt of electricity on our rooftop and on our parking lot, helping us to provide 70% of our electricity we use and also which we use here today. So you have a green broadcast. So that's one part, but also we have realized specifically in 2016 when we have the water shortage also here in Gauteng, we redid our whole garden setup, our whole technology we use in order to run our river, which we have here. And this is all done on the basis of to make sure, first of all, little water usage, as Sipho already mentioned, try to manage the way and how we consume, but also try to optimize the way on how it is managed. And so you are able to see this here at Siemens Park as a live demonstration in both of these fields. But when we go back and we talk about specifically in the energy space, and we just heard South Africa is maybe very well positioned, because what we have seen is that not only energy is an issue because of CO2 emissions and climate change aspects, which we already knew, but if you go back before the Ukraine or the Russian invasion into Ukraine, gas was largely seen as a transition energy. Mm-hmm. But we see now that this is not very much so, because for one reason, gas prices, because of the global supply chain changes due to sanctions, have rocketed in the last couple of months and making energy very expensive. And so hence it will also be difficult for a country like South Africa to afford these prices in order to fuel our electricity when our consumer are not in the position to pay for it. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it needs to be a balance. The second part is what we also have seen is that within the context of gas, that the emissions, not maybe the CO2 when you burn it, but the methane emissions which come from gas are so much higher than, for instance, with all other fossil products, that the impact on climate overall is worse. So I think the whole discussion around that kind of transition energy has changed a lot. Where does that put us? It put us in the position that we can actively discuss green energy for South Africa. And as we heard, we are in a situation where we have an aging infrastructure, so we need to invest in any case. So why don't invest into something what is now clearly the most affordable technology? It's green, it's wind, and solar generated electricity.
Absolutely. And I want to get back to the renewables and those in just a moment. But before we get to that, I'd like to ask you, Peter, as the NEPAD Business Foundation, you've also been involved in a number of partnerships and projects. What have been the main findings and lessons that you've experienced?
I think the biggest opportunity that we've seen is the ability to unlock the goodwill of business and supporting some of the challenges we have as a nation, as a region. Sabina mentioned earlier what Siemens has done here at their own park to contribute to the agenda. I think what we've seen, particularly through the Strategic Water Partners Network, is that companies have, to the large extent, all done this. They've done whatever they can within their factory fences to reduce their water demand, to improve their energy supply, and it's becoming a case of diminishing returns. So the opportunity now exists for them to step outside their factory fence, to partner with municipalities, to partner with government, to start to drive this agenda of energy resilience, water resilience, and that's what we're seeing. That's a big mind shift change, I think, that we've certainly seen in the last couple of years.
Now, I can't help but ask the question, why are we where we are? Now, we've heard of many reasons, and I want to ask you this specifically, Sipho. In terms of, I mean, you explained water allocation, water distribution. What led us to this point?
Yep, I just think infrastructure backlog by and large. Particularly, if you like, in the electricity setup in terms of the challenges that are affecting us. But I think by and large, if you look at the challenges specifically in our value chain, right at the tail end of the water supply value chain, you find that over the years, what we have been seeing is high water losses, We call it non-revenue water, precisely because municipalities are not able to generate revenue with the water that is being supplied. And then that has caught up with us. About 30-40% of the water we supply to municipality gets to waste. So we need to rapidly rise above that and deal with that backlog. I think, if you like, in my view, it's the issues of non-investment, by and large, in the water network and infrastructure. I think within South African context, we take water granted. I think we've been endowed with this resource for a number of years, and you place an order, you get it, and relatively inexpensive within South African context. If you look at the bulk water price in South Africa, at 1,000 litre, it will not buy you even 1.5 litres of bottled water. That's how relatively inexpensive it is. With 11 rand 61, you cannot get 1.5 litre of bottled water at any retail store, and we'll be supplying 1,000 litre of that. So I think it has been relatively inexpensive, and our attitude has always been, don't worry, we'll sort it out. So I think the challenges that we have, by and large, in our value chain are related to infrastructure backlog that we need to get going, from upgrade, operations, maintenance, and really that's what got us here.
And how is business dealing with this, Sabina? Because obviously these are issues that are preventing you from operating at optimal levels. So how are you dealing with it in the here and now when it comes to your operating environment?
Well, I mean, look, for us, obviously, water restrictions are a concern. However, at Siemens Park, we did cater for it, that if there are shortages, that we are fully operational again. And obviously, that's an expense, because when you drive in here, you will also see that we have massive water tanks here. They are here in case, there should be a fire, that if the pressure is low, we are able to sprinkle any fire hazard, for that matter. But our support is very much to the industry, which in our case uses water as a product. Yeah, I mean, if you have water demand, like for instance in the food and beverage environment, in hospitals, but also in the automobile environment, we help our customers to find solutions to optimize their water consumption, but also manage the water process in general within the plant. And so it's not only within commercial proposition, but also in the case of, for instance, the municipalities or like bulk suppliers like Rent Water, but also a city of Cape Town, for instance, or eThekwini Water in Durban, where we help them to run their systems, and our technology, we call it seawater, not in the context of the ocean, but Siemens Water Solutions. Here we have developed software, but also intelligent monitoring ways where we can identify early leak detection, because as Sipho said, 40% of the product is wasted. So if it's wasted, you don't have revenue collection. And through our technology, we can first of all increase on the metering side your revenue collection to make it like smart meters. We have implementations of that in Ghana as well as in Botswana, where countries already a little bit ahead of what we do currently in South Africa, but also where we have dedicated systems where you can see if there is pressure on a pipe, if there is a water leakage, and you have the possibility to detect it immediately before gushing water is coming out of the system. What means, when I talk about detection, then it also gives any customer, in that context maybe Rent Water, because we're talking about it today, the possibility to maybe on a platform type of thing dispatch a technician which he sees on his iPhone or whatever handheld you will give him, where the smallest level of pressure is and where the leak currently occurs, so that it can be fixed immediately. I think one thing which we advocate as Siemens is, because we have learned that also digital products in Africa are implementable. And I gave you the example of Ghana and Botswana, where we have digital technology for water management put in place. And digital technology has the possibility, first of all, that you can manage it through, obviously, the cloud. Gives you more transparency at any given point in time. So even if Sipho would like to know, where do we have a water leakage, in case the system is fully implemented, he will be able to see it, But also it will help you to ensure that you don't have to have physical infrastructure in cable and the likes, because as we know, we are in a country where these things get vandalized, and you need to, remove that kind of attraction to the illicit trade to make sure that you are able to provide your services. And that is a complete different way on how we look at water.
That's a very tangible example of using innovation for our here and now, for our short term, and how we can, as a people, private sector, public sector, work together to find implementable solutions. But Peter, I'd like to hear from you as well, because I know that the NEPAD Business Foundation has been operating across Southern and Eastern Africa. What are some other examples that could be implemented in the here and now for a better, greater Johannesburg?
I think the solutions are the same across the continent, to be honest. We've seen water partnerships in various municipalities across Southern Africa particularly. But the model is very much the same. It's about saying, what are the challenges and how can the big water users step in to support the municipality of solving those? And fundamentally, it comes down to the same issue. It comes down to getting the best use of the resource that you have available. It comes down to non-revenue water, which has already been shared, and the technology required to first of all understand how your system's working, where you're losing water, and then to adapt and make sure that you can solve that. So certainly here in South Africa, there's some positive movements. We've been involved in a partnership with a municipality here in the country with a high case of non-revenue water. And the intervention of the companies involved has allowed them to understand better how the system works, to start to manage pressure in the system better, consequently reduce leaks, but then importantly get billing right so that customers are paying what they should be. And there's many different examples. I know in other municipalities there's been a big drive towards some of the government buildings where there's big leaks in the systems, to domestic water use where there's also big leaks in the systems. So knowing where those challenges are and knowing who the right people are to start to plug the leaks is fundamental to the solution. So that's something we on a campaign to deal with now. We've had successful pilot run in one of the municipalities, and now we're scaling up to do that across the country. And that does include working with the municipalities that run water supply, with the city of Joburg, and with others. So there's huge opportunity there.
Brilliant. Now, Aradhana, bringing this to the energy conversation. I mean, with water, we heard of some of the challenges that have been experienced that have led to this. But when it comes to energy, what are some of the implementable short-term solutions that would have immediate effect in improving the situation we find ourselves in?
So I think there's 2 points. There's solutions that can be implemented by the customer, and there's solutions that need to be implemented by the government and the municipalities. So from a municipality perspective, they need to start, looking at priority lists of projects that need to be form part of the infrastructure projects, because there is, as was mentioned with water, there is also the infrastructure backlog for electricity. And I think there was an article that mentioned 330 billion rand of infrastructure backlog just in Johannesburg. But in this financial year, there was only 1.7 billion rand that was allocated, or 7 billion rand for Johannesburg, but city of Joburg was 1.7 billion. And that is minuscule compared to the 330 billion rand. So there's definite need for prioritization of these projects. There's definite need for, a proper long-term plan for CAPEX, OPEX, and rehabilitation of infrastructure, and also need to transform within the municipality in terms of climate change and sustainable infrastructure. Then we go back to, what is kind of encapsulated in the 4 Ds. We call it the decarbonization, digitalization, deregulation, and decentralization. So basically, you want to kind of encapsulate that solution in all of the solutions that you implement. So from an energy perspective, I think it's quite an easy solution, and a lot of customers are doing it, installing their own PV and backup generation. And this is, I think, has been enabled by the government as well, as part of, the Schedule 2 of the Electricity Regulation Act, and not having actually any license required for a system of any size at the moment, as the President had mentioned. All you just need is an off-taker for that energy that you would need to produce. So I think there's that solution, but I think many customers may find it very difficult to implement those solutions because it's very capital intensive for them. And going through load shedding and going through an economic crisis of losing business because of load shedding, it's almost like a snowballing effect that, they are in this situation where they cannot put in the capital infrastructure. And I think that's where some innovative solutions that form part of, like public-private partnerships that can implement projects and also portfolios of projects that can help the needs of the smaller businesses. I guess, the bigger businesses can do it themselves, but the issue lies within the smaller businesses and the economies within that. So there's a myriad of challenges. There are solutions, but I think, there's also government and regulation that also needs to come to the party for us to enable these solutions correctly, because there's also a risk of implementing solutions that are not safe and, not correct or in terms of installation and having the proper certification for the customers themselves. So that's also a challenge that needs to be worried about, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And you touch upon some very important aspects, and that particularly of investments and funding into this. Where's the funding coming from? Sipho, I'd actually like to ask you, in terms of the projects that you're currently running at the moment, how are you going about this? How are you looking to solve for some of the issues that you're experiencing, and how do you view the future?
Yeah, but just in terms of funding as a utility and our scheduling, we are a trading entity and self-funding. Really, it's us generating our own top line, covering all our costs, and making sure that we have a surplus of sort to reinvest into the business, to upgrade, refurbish, operate, and maintain. One of the few utilities in the world. We're 120 years now. We have not gotten a cent from government. No bailouts. Not that we can't do with that, but so I just think that's how we fund. But we also, Johannesburg Security Exchange debt listed output, where we also crowdfund or pull in the private sector to assist us with a good weighted average cost of capital to invest into the business. So if you like, you want to have a good mix between, money that comes from your tariffs, the private sector involvement in terms of funding these projects. We're looking at, for example, later on we'll move towards solutions, but hydropower, it's the EPC contract, it's going to be 10 kit, and we bring the private sector funding as well. And then, of course, going forward, we believe that we should start getting some allocation from the fiscus to assist us to deal with some of the challenges in local government space. I think what you're seeing is that water is the second biggest revenue spinner in municipalities, but as soon as the money comes in, it deals with other requirements in the municipalities and very little investment that goes into water. So to deal with some of these challenges, we believe that you need to have, if you like, a multiplicity of infrastructure capital funding that is coming into our sector to deal with some of these challenges. Yeah.
And Peter, I'd also like to ask you a similar question. What's best in class in terms of unlocking more funding towards improving infrastructure?
So I think we've all seen the success of the energy unlocking through the IPP program. So there's been much talk over the years about doing the same in the water sector. It's not quite so simple in the water sector, given that it is government-owned infrastructure. You can't just go develop it on the side somewhere and connect. So there is a move to that kind of model to see, what is possible given the constraints that municipalities do have. How do you then use your customers themselves to be part of that financing solution, making them have a direct offtake with the operator that can enable that. But importantly also to look at the MFMA, the PFMA provisions that will be restrictive to allowing for private capital to flow in there. So that's work that we're looking at the moment, to see what is possible, to see what the red flags are, because we know they're there. It's now a case of how can we use the goodwill of government currently through programs like Operation Vulindlela and the like to unlock some of those legal impediments that are there at the moment. So the opportunity is there, but it's going to take a lot of work, early stage preparation work, to understand the viability, the challenges, the modalities and mechanisms to be able to allow for private capital to flow.
And Sabina, is this perhaps an area where we could see more public-private partnerships? And if so, what type?
Well, I mean, look, from a positioning point of view, and we just heard that, the energy schedule has also been adjusted. I mean, in August was the first time that there is a feed-in tariff defined, which means that not only the traditional IPP program will be commercially viable, but also private initiatives or smaller activities, because now you have a basis under which you also can get bankable projects going, right? So that is one part. The second aspect specifically was in the energy space is that there is a lot of money available out, yeah? I mean, there are many people which want to invest in green technology. Yeah. And if you just think about, I mean, this is also valid for Siemens, we support projects not only with capital but also with equity in the context of when there are green projects and they have societal impact. And so we are not the only company, so all the multinationals have committed some kind of targets of net zero in their total operation and their balance sheet between 2030 and 2050. And so therefore you see a lot of capital being available globally to invest. And South Africa is definitely one of the destinations. You will know that during COP26, South Africa has been the only country to seal a deal of $8.5 billion being made available by the UK, US, France and Germany for the Just Energy Transition Partnership. And that means loans, but not only concessional loans from these governments, but also attracting private companies to come in here. Why is that so important? Because it is important for the attractiveness of South Africa. Yeah. And the companies which are here want to be here because South Africa on the African continent is a country which is relatively easy to do business, right? But when you think about the multinationals, then they have an inherent interest to decarbonize their value chain, not only their own production, but the total value chain, because that is a commitment they gave to the capital market on their balance sheet and their commitment going forward. And for us, in South Africa, we better, transition once for that renewable energy is a cheaper input on the energy prices, but also in order to keep the multinationals in the country which contribute to our GDP. Because if they think they only will be able indefinite to purchase coal-fired electricity, then their answer post-2030, 2050 is maybe one which is not in favor of South Africa. And therefore, the initiative specifically, as Peter mentioned, with Operation Vulindlela, addresses these kind of transitional topics, not only which in the energy space, but also in water, transport, and the rule of law.
Absolutely. And this forms a very good basis that we'll be talking about shortly after the break. I would like firstly to thank you, Peter, for joining us. Peter, that was Peter Warendal, Chief Executive Officer at NEPAD Business Foundation Southern and Eastern Africa. After the break, we'll be joined by a new panelist, Monique Griffith, Deputy Director at Smart City Office. We'll now be taking a short break, and after the break, we'll be back. Thank you.